Welcome all to the Friends of the Epic Network interview with CivicSpark and Kif Scheuer. My name is Marshall Curry. I am the EpicN Program Manager, and I'll be moderating the call today. EpicN is the nonprofit association of institutions that adopt the EPIC model for university and community partnerships, and we're hosting the call. EpicN supports programs across the globe that connects the human capital of universities to communities to improve the quality of life for all and the social wealth for all involved. To improve the support provided to EpicN member programs and those individuals who are champions of the network helping support programs across the country and the world, we've begun a new interview series that we're calling the Friends of the Epic Network series. These will be short interviews of friends who might be leaders of local communities, national organizations that have specific resources to offer, or just individuals with inspiring stories to share. As the program manager, I've sat down with these individuals and learned in depth about what they're trying to do and how they can best support EPIC programs and communities. And I've tried to help them whittle down a presentation into a quick hitting, fast back and forth conversation. So our programs and again, you as individuals who are not associated with the program but are interested in sparking change and improved quality of life in your communities can watch these interviews and leave with action-ready, tangible resources and connections that you can start acting on immediately. These interviews are presented by our EPIC member programs who have contributed to the network in their time, their leadership, and tracking projects as well as financially. The Ford Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So thank you for them for contributing to allow this program to happen. With that, I'm going to introduce our speaker or our interviewee today. Kif Scheuer is the Civic Spark Program Director at the Local Government Commission. Kif is a solution-oriented sustainability professional with a strong history of engaging diverse audiences in real-world climate protection efforts through innovative market-focused research and analysis, creative program design, effective project implementation, and compelling public advocacy and education. He founded the Civic Spark program and now directs it as a part of his work at the Local Government Commission in California. He supports and recruits 90 fellows who are dedicated to building capacity for local public agencies to address community resilience issues such as climate change, water resource management, housing, and mobility. And part of the reason why I invited him here today for this interview is because he's had a long-standing relationship with individuals of the network as well as the network in California in particular. And we figured it was about time to do this interview so everyone in the network could know what they do and how they do it and how Kif is involved. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kif and kind of go back and forth with him in some question and answer so you can learn a little bit more about the organization. So Kif, I was hoping you could start it off by just giving a little bit more of a detailed description of what is Civic Spark.
Sure, thanks so much, Marshall. And I'm gonna go ahead and drop my camera out for the time being. I'm not sure if it's showing to everybody, but for the bandwidth's sake, we've had some internet issues this morning. And so crossing our fingers that it won't get in the way, but hopefully you can hear me right now. Really glad to be here, really glad to have the opportunity to chat with you guys. As Marshall noted, I've known about EPIC for a long time, since it was born over at U of O in some sense. I'm a longtime friend of Mark Schlossberg's, who I know many of you work with. So really excited to connect and build this relationship. So Civic Spark, and you could go to the next slide, Marshall, is an AmeriCorps program. And it was great to see two AmeriCorps participants and program staff here on this call. Usually everybody knows that AmeriCorps is out there, but they don't know what it is. And we are an AmeriCorps program. And if you're not familiar with it, AmeriCorps was set up as the Domestic Peace Corps about 20 years ago under the Clinton administration. And AmeriCorps members across the country commit their time to address critical community needs like academic achievement, disaster response, fighting poverty. As an AmeriCorps program ourselves, CivicSpark focuses on, as Marshall noted, building local government capacity to address entrenched and emerging issues, which is a pretty broad topic. But we also try to serve as what we call a social purpose career accelerator for future leaders. We do this by partnering with local governments to implement capacity building projects. So unlike some programs, we're not focused on one type of project or subject area. Rather, we design the program to respond to the reality that the issues and needs of local governments vary by location, jurisdiction, and challenge. And that's been hard for us, but also really a great way to respond to needs as they emerge, such as COVID-19. So we're always looking at the placement of our fellows in terms of what the need is for the local government and the opportunity of the fellow, because we want to try and offer a whole program. You can go to the next slide. So we at the Local Government Commission who operate the program, we're a almost 40-year-old nonprofit that's been involved in the smart growth movement particularly, but a lot of sustainability and issues since our inception. If any of you are planners or planner affiliated, we ran New Partners for Smart Growth for 15 years, a national conference. We propagated the Awani principles for resource efficient communities. So we've been really at the table on sustainability in many, many ways. And CivicSpark represents our foray into direct assistance through a national service program. And we've been, as I said, doing it for 6 years. It started and is a partnership with the California Office of Planning and Research, the governor's office, because they're a liaison to local governments, and Governor Brown, when he set up the program, wanted to create a connection and saw a national service program as a way of doing that. So we create a dialogue between what's happening on the ground with our fellows and what's happening at the state. It's also a partnership with the Corporation for National Community Service and California Volunteers, which are the federal and state national service agencies and organizations. But the biggest part of it for us in terms of who runs it and who's involved are our local partners. So we work with local governments, NGOs, state agencies who host and supervise the fellows project work and also provide a federal match to support the program. You can go to the next slide. We serve all over California. AmeriCorps programs, if they're started as a state program, they mostly stay within a state boundary. We're exploring right now, actually, we have a planning grant proposal in to dip our toes into Washington State. They had an opportunity to do that, and we're going to look at that over the next couple of years. But generally, we're in California. Unlike other programs as well, we do small placements. We have individual fellows or a couple of fellows in a team in sites. We have about 60, 65 partners a year for our 90 fellows. We also cluster in the major metro areas because that's where the demand is. There's just more partners and local governments who want to do projects. Our footprint can shift from year to year because we have about 50% of our partners return year over year. So this map that you're seeing is where we were last year. Not a big presence in the Central Valley. We've had more or less at other times and mostly clustered in the major metro areas. Go ahead. As far as kind of a program structure overview, given the capacity building nature of our work and the fact that we're serving a lot of subject areas, and I'll give you some examples in a bit, we have a lot of flexibility, but we need an overarching structure. And the way we've defined it is by establishing 4 common steps that help standardize the program delivery. So the first thing that happens when a fellow starts is they go through a gap assessment process. It's like a compass setting exercise to make sure they understand the goals, the capacity building goals, and the alignment with their project activities and get the project started right. Once they're underway, the service project itself is really the bulk of what they're doing for the year, and it's a specific research, planning, or implementation project or set of projects that they're going to work on, like a climate action plan or a housing element or an outreach plan. In parallel with their service, the fellows work on a volunteer engagement activity. It's a small part of our program. All AmeriCorps programs include some volunteer engagement, and we treat it like a small exercise. They spend about 100 hours connecting and increasing volunteerism in the community. And then finally, part of the capacity building effort is to try and build momentum to keep the work going. And so we engage in a transitional activity at the end where we share results, try and get stakeholders to buy into the outcomes of the fellows' work. Go ahead to the next slide.
So Kif talked through this with me, the first few slides, and I kind of wanted to get to the point of what would I see your fellows doing, and could you provide some examples of that to us?
Yeah, thank you. And this is where the sort of most exciting part of the program is, like the structure and all background is what it is. It's a framework to get things going, but it's what the fellows do in our community. So yeah, thanks for going forward. I'm going to walk through a couple slides and a couple profiles of fellows to give you the kind of subject area space that we work in. So by far the most significant number of projects are in the climate field, whether it's in mitigation, adaptation. We're also seeing more deep decarbonization projects coming up. So there's some examples from this year. We're doing climate vulnerability assessment in the Delta region, working on fire recovery and adaptation planning in Butte County, doing some EV assessments in San Luis Obispo, carbon neutrality plans, carbon farming work. So we have a partner who comes to us and they say, I think a fellow could help with this. And so we get to be part of all these really cool climate projects. You can go to the next slide. So one example of a climate projects fellow's work is Zach, who was a fellow last year. He served in the city of Pleasanton, and Pleasanton was sort of did not want to join a new community choice aggregation program. This is something we have in California where local governments take over control of the procurement of energy and generally really ramp up the green renewable content of their portfolio in that process. So it's a really great emissions reduction strategy. But the city of Pleasanton wasn't ready to jump on board. So they had Zach work on a memo to do an evaluation of the pros and cons of joining East Bay Clean Energy. And his memo was actually instrumental in helping the city decide to go forward and take this huge step, which went from I think about 25% clean power portfolio in PG&E's territory to 50% at least, and a lot of folks go to 100%. So pretty significant outcome. And he was hired on as a coordinator, and a number of our fellows do get hired on. It's never an expectation, but it's a great outcome when it happens. Go ahead. We do a lot of work in the water policy and management space. During the drought, we expanded our program from climate to water specifically with support from the governor's office. And so we do technical and community engagement projects mostly designed to protect and preserve water systems and increase equitable access to water. So we've done storm flow analysis projects in Lake County. Groundwater sustainability is huge, and that's happening throughout the state. And we're doing some flood hazard management projects in Livermore this year. Go ahead. An example of a water project and also a project where a fellow was able to scale an existing program. Nikki Powell served a couple years ago with the Long Beach Water Department, and they'd started something called the Certified Blue Restaurant Program. So they're trying to increase the adoption and utilization of water efficiency technologies and practices in their restaurants. And so she was able to certify 32 restaurants and identify over 2 million gallons of water savings and do a lot of education and outreach and marketing in the process. She was hired on by another city to do water use work as a follow-on. Go ahead. In the last couple of years, we've expanded into what we call opportunity access projects. So not just environmental programs, but programs that have more of a social equity lens. Things like affordable housing, mobility. We've done some rural broadband projects. Because the capacity gaps are there, but the issues that they're facing, the challenges are somewhat different. And so we've done some technical assessment around state grant programs, housing element updates. We were working on this really cool project this year with the community colleges, looking at housing solutions on campus for community colleges, because housing insecurity for community college students is actually a huge issue. And affordability across California is a gigantic issue as well. Go ahead. Katie Oren served with the Community Corporation of Santa Monica last year. They're a nonprofit affordable housing provider in Santa Monica, and she did some really neat work working on design guidelines and standards to incorporate sustainability features into future construction. She also researched off-site prefab housing opportunities so that to try and lower the cost of construction for greener affordable housing properties, and also got involved in a range of community engagement and sustainability initiatives. She is actually a master's student in Cornell right now. And a number of our students, they'll go on to graduate school. About 10 to 15% will go to graduate school using CivicSpark as a springboard to that next step. Go ahead. Last, I'll just touch on that across many of our subject areas now, we're seeing an increasing number of projects have an equity or environmental justice as the primary project focus, including community assessments, network development, and technical assistance. So we've done some community engagement work in Marin, Tulare, Alameda County. We're doing an energy equity project in Los Angeles, done some community leadership work in San Jose. So a real range of stuff, but where equity and environmental justice are the focus. Go ahead to the next slide. And just one more example is Edgar, who served last year as well. These are all fairly recent examples that I provided you. He served with the city of Emeryville. So his job at Emeryville was actually to work on some building electrification policies, but he came into the program with a passion for environmental justice and equity issues. And his supervisor recognized this and said, hey, you know, let me let you run with this, give you some space there. And he was able to develop help set up an equity committee for city staff. He drafted an equity toolkit to try and better center equity in the government practices, and then organized a racial equity workshop for city staff. And he was able to leverage this experience to a position focused on environmental justice, with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Go ahead.
Wow, Kif, that's great. A lot of your fellows do such amazing work and are continuing to do it. I'm curious, taking a step back, maybe, why are you doing this work?
Yeah, you know, I think this is an audience of the willing and the interested, and you all probably have some of the same motivation that we do for doing this work. I'll just unpack for myself what this is about and how we came into it as the Local Government Commission. So you can go to the next slide. We see communities everywhere facing widespread environmental and social equity challenges, which we broadly categorize under the rubric of resilience threats. In this context, we're speaking about resilience as the ability of institutions, infrastructure, environments to withstand stresses and shocks. And things like climate change are pushing us to the brink, COVID-19 pushing us over the brink. And coupled with affordable housing issues and the many challenges that we're facing, we see that communities are really stretched to the limit and beyond. Now, many states, California being one of those, has set some pretty ambitious goals to address those challenges. But local governments are critical to the resilience response, right? They're the center point for many community actions and activities. They set the bar in California and probably in some of your states as well. Local government or local rule takes precedence in zoning and land use decisions. And so it really matters what happens at the local level if you have a state that's supportive, and it even matters more if you don't have a state that's supportive. But local governments face really three main resilience capacity gaps, is what we call them, that I'll just touch on. One, maintaining the status quo, trying to just keep the lights on these days takes up the majority of resources. Anybody who's done engagement from an EPIC program knows it's hard to get people's time and attention. So responding to an emerging challenge is often the thing that gets pushed down to the bottom. The second thing I'll say is that these threats, particularly climate change, but housing, COVID, et cetera, are unprecedented in scale and complexity, which means the solutions require new knowledge, policies, and approaches. These are hard for smaller local governments and even larger local governments to develop or acquire. And then finally, the kinds of solutions that we work on, the kinds of solutions I'm sure you're trying to develop, are often best addressed through integrated approaches that require coordination, deeper community engagement, and that is also hard to do. You can go to the next slide. Set against this resilience capacity gap, I just want to touch on the fact that emerging leadership is increasingly important and central to resilience efforts nationally, globally. So we're seeing young people, and I use the term emerging leadership to cover really a wide range of folks from, honestly, elementary up through near young professionals, who are getting more and more actively engaged in these fights. And they're seeing it from the time they're young, as they grow and mature, and as they step out into the world, as central to who they are and what they want to do in the world. We're seeing a lot of work that is political advocacy. This picture is from like one of the climate marches, but we're also seeing a lot of technical work, people doing very advanced professional work at a young age. It's happening in local communities. One of the logos up here is the Mycelium Youth Network, this amazing climate education program in Oakland, all the way up to the national and global stage. There's a lot of stuff happening on campuses, certainly EPIC, but the fossil-free divestment campaigns, Next Gen Climate have done a lot of work at the campus level. And then there's young professional organizations. Some of these are working in seasoned organizational structures, and some are really bottom up. We see this as a powerful and important resource in the space that we're working in because it's a catalyst for long-term leadership development, but it's also a way to connect and support with the communities in need that I just mentioned on the last slide. So that's where, and you can go to the next slide, we sort of have built that CivicSpark around that space. So we're tapping the power of emerging leaders to help build resilience capacity by providing critical short-term human capital in the form of fellows who are going to be embedded with these partners for 11 months. We're going to deploy them onto projects designed to identify solutions, hopefully at the leading edge of some of these complex issues. They have more time to research something than maybe the staff do. And ideally, through their presence, the extended arms, eyes, and ears, they can bridge local and regional needs and build more integrated solutions that last. You can go to the next slide. Just to, I guess, toot our own horn, if you will, we're making a lasting impact. This is making a difference. So over the last 5 complete years, we're in our 6th program year right now and recruiting for our 7th. Our fellows have provided over 500,000 hours to 190 agencies on 500 projects. And that's about 300 fellows who've gone through the program. We've seen the sort of bread and butter of climate action planning. We've had a role in. We've put on a lot of events. We've leveraged volunteer hours. I think we've connected with over 47,000 community members. So it's really helping to catalyze change. And most of our projects, which start with the local government defining their goals, are telling us that we've met their goals. So ultimately, we're meeting that capacity need. You can go to the next slide. And we're having an impact in the goal of being a social purpose career accelerator. So the 300 fellows who've gone through the program, our most recent survey, we had about a 44% response rate of alumni. 83% are in a relevant sort of sustainability, if you will, career path. 73% are working in the public sector or in a public service role. Almost 70% are saying CivicSpark had a significant impact on their lives and careers. So this is good for the fellows. We're helping to catalyze leadership, but ultimately it's also helping to build long-term leadership and workforce needs for the public sector to have champions who are coming up through the ranks sooner, faster, and stronger, and who are going to go out there and make a difference. And I'll mention here, this is obviously potentially of very much interest in EPIC programs because you're working with the same people. And these people are going to go on to leadership roles in the space you're trying to connect with and serve. And so I'll just say it's been incredibly valuable for us to stay in touch with our alumni. And I encourage you all to stay in touch with your students because they're going to be the partners of tomorrow. Go ahead to the next slide.
So Kip, as you're sharing this why, and we had a chat come through from the webinar as well, that this why sounds so much like EPIC programs why. The problems that individuals our individual programs are trying to solve are very similar. They're trying to work with local government on the building capacity, facing unprecedented threats, and building networks. So how do you see the two programs coming together?
Yeah, that is the essential rub of the conversation. And I tried to move quickly through the overview so we could get to this point and talk some more. I'll share a few thoughts, and I think then we open it up to more dialogue because this is a point of discovery for us, honestly. So you can go to the next slide. I've highlighted a few thoughts and from history and experience and ideas that I have. So the first thing to say is CivicSpark is a great next step opportunity for your students. So if you're running a program and you're getting people whetting their appetite with community-based sustainability project work, the undergraduates particularly are going to say, where do I go next? Well, CivicSpark is a great step. Your students are great candidates for us. Similarly, our alumni represent a particular, I think, value point for EPIC students, again, probably mostly your undergraduates, because they are near-term sustainability professionals, and getting them to share their experience and their pathway with your students is another way to cultivate folks' engagement and support in EPIC programs. In California, since that's where we operate right now, we're a possible liaison for local EPIC programs. We've got a footprint, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those ideas in a second, but we're out in communities every year, and some of them are adjacent to or are partners in EPIC projects. And so trying to make sure that we're aware of each other and sharing resources or teeing each other up is a really great idea. And then finally, I'll just mention the Local Government Commission has a pretty wide reach, particularly in California, but even beyond a little bit. And so trying to get the word out about EPIC recruitment through LGC more broadly, and sharing and participating in some of our events and media is a great way to potentially get the kind of enhance your reach. So you can go to the last slide, which is probably where we'll stop and open up things a little bit, because Marshall and I really came up with this one together in conversation with one of the other EPIC partners who does work with a VISTA program, which was thinking, stepping back from our program, I wanted to think about how EPIC programs anywhere can work with any service program to build relationships. So there's a lot of words on these slides because I hope it is of value in its own sense. And I don't take intellectual credit for this idea. I think it's just an outlining of some conversations that I've had with Mark, I've had with some others in EPIC, and certainly brought to the fore with Marshall. We see kind of three areas to touch on here: the community connections, what I call insights and intel, and co-generation and resourcing. So if you're in a community, there's a good chance there's AmeriCorps members in your communities. It's almost guaranteed, or VISTA members, or some other kind of fellowship structure program that's out in the community doing their work and knows nothing about what you're doing. Some of them might, but most of them won't. And so you can build that relationship to identify, for example, different community perspectives, build that connection, because they may be working with CVOs and NGOs that typically aren't part of the EPIC project activity, but you want at the table when you do a community meeting. They're also, because they're on the ground, they may have insights and intel, as I called it, to find out what's going to work, right? You want to know where there are resources. You might want to know if a particular project has legs. You might want to know if there's feedback needed for an EPIC project initiative going outside of just the local government footprint, and who they talk to might be useful. And they're going to be there before and after you, so there's an opportunity to potentially get some leading information as you're getting started up. And then finally, project co-generation and resourcing. The idea is there, because we're the kinds of program that I run and other programs like us, and EPIC programs are looking to cultivate things that last, there may be a handoff or a project startup opportunity there. So if I'm doing a project that's winding up as an EPIC program is starting up, my fellow could hand something over, or a VISTA member could hand something over. Similarly, if you're looking to get some legs after a project ends, identifying the local VISTA program or AmeriCorps program that has a functional connection to what's going on could be a way to help carry that forward if the local government, as we all know, has got limited resources to do so. So those are just some ideas, but they all kind of fall under the banner of being force multipliers for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Kip. And it was a pleasure putting this together with you and listening to M Partner at the University of Mississippi to hear about how they use their AmeriCorps VISTA program to force multiply their EPIC program. And I really appreciate your time and again, foresight to think about this in terms of across the country or across the EPIC network, rather than just with CivicSpark, although I really do think we can build some connection in California. And I just want to take a mention to share a little bit about how I see my role in as a EPIC N program manager and how that kind of shaped the creation of this slide for those of you who are watching the recording and those of you on the call. My job is to help EPIC programs, and because of EPIC N's footprint being on a global scale, in a largely domestic scale right now, but also on a global scale, we're coming into contact with a lot of organizations that it doesn't really fit for an EPIC program manager to have conversations with on a day-to-day basis, because the scaling is different. CivicSpark scaling is across California, and so on an individual level, it might make sense for a program to talk to KIF to figure out how EPIC programs and his fellows work together to meet that same why. But for the most part, they're year to year, they're not going to continue that conversation unless there's crossover. And that's kind of, I think, where EPIC N and my role comes in, where I can have a conversation or a few conversations and continual conversations with leaders like KIF to put together very clear next steps to try and take the guesswork out for program managers. Of course, each program manager in the Epic network is going to want to take steps differently, and each service organization is going to want to take steps differently, but trying to take that guesswork out, I think, is something that my role is well situated for, and that's kind of the resource and benefit I'm trying to put together with these Friends in the Network interviews for the next year or so. And so with that, and since I've shared that, I really do agree with what KIF has said. I think that thinking about the organization or service organizations as a way to increase an Epic program's offer to a current partner or future partner to tackle projects that have been added to the to-do list at the end of a project or in the middle of a partnership or at the beginning of a partnership, offering on the ground kind of intel and information about who might be a future community partner for either program, and then building those connections across the communities as you start a partnership. They might be really helpful in the kickoff event to try and get partners there to try and get insight and build up those project scopes as you're designing your Epic program for that year. And so with that, I will hand it over to the audience for question and answer. We'll do an outro for the recording in just a few minutes, but right now I'm going to open it up and we'll leave this slide up, I think, unless it becomes relevant that we shouldn't, but let's open it up to the audience, see if you have any questions. So Gavin, it looks like you got your hand raised, so go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kit, for the presentation. I guess my initial reaction is, well, this is a great program in California, but not in Wisconsin.
I'll take that. I'll take that, actually. So
yeah.
Gavin, thank you so much for that critique.
It's not a critique. It's just,
sorry.
It sounds awesome. I wish I had one in Wisconsin.
And the cool thing is, I think we've identified one for you. There's a new organization called Lead for America, and I did a previous recording with their chief programs officer, and they've actually had conversations with KIF about how their models are very similar. Their geographic realm is just different. And so in our new YouTube channel for Epic N, there is a interview that was published this morning that was recorded, I think in March, right when COVID was really hitting. So it's interviewing Maya Pace from her room in California, describing the Lead for America program and how it has very similar design and potential force multiplication. So we can reconnect with her after this, or the video next.
And I'll also say, if I can, we are actively looking at how we can expand beyond California. So it's been a goal of mine for a long time. I would love to find partners who want to explore sort of building the model, building the program, taking it to other places. I mentioned Washington. The way AmeriCorps programs work is you can do a planning grant to try and explore, and Washington had a cycle, so that's why we're exploring there. But I've tried to get some funding from a couple different people for a national planning grant that could allow us to be in any state where we can get to critical mass. So definitely would love to talk with you about it, Gavin. The Midwest and Wisconsin and all would be really great to be able to support.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I was just kind of making a silly comment, but my real question is, what are your interests? What are your self-interests? What are your aspirations for the organization? Is there any way that we, as people who are not in California, could be helping advance it? You mentioned wanting to expand into other areas. But yeah, just kind of curious to know where you all are looking to move in the future.
Yeah, so I think, the demand is there. I mean, you guys may make this joke, I do, in a sort of flip way, that climate change is giving me great job security at the moment because we're not dealing with it. And so for the time being, it's a growth industry for people to work in. It may be hard to identify resources, and certainly COVID is changing this, but we need more and more people working in this space. So I see a lot of opportunity to grow a program like CivicSpark. I would love to get to a scale where we had 300 or 400 fellows a year going on nationally. And so looking at where those sites are, where those the context is ripe for something like this, and actually Epic and CivicSpark, there could be a structural alignment too, because you're creating frameworks and relationships and working in certain ways that, you know, we could leverage each other. But similarly, one of the reasons that I've nurtured this relationship is in our program, we call the relationship we have with EPIC a pathway partnership, because we're all supporting the larger leadership pathway that is in all of our interests. We need to bring people up younger, faster, stronger, and put them out there to do this work and take us where I'm not going to get there myself. And so that's part of my interest as well, is continuing to lift up other programs and other organizations that are helping to create those pathways. Maya is a great example. They work in a different geography, a slightly different model, but they're an ally. And those of us who work in cultivating leadership, it's not just about the project work, it's about the people that we're creating in this field. So, so my interests are multiple, both growing the program, expanding the kind of places we're doing this kind of work, and in just kind of creating a more inroads for people to do this work.
I love your generational view on this, right? You're thinking about how do we bring every single generation up quickly and into the realms and topics that we need them to be to make communities better. And I appreciate that as a up and coming professional with a newborn at home. Thank you. Jose Zambrana, you're next.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hey, Kenneth, it's always great to see the work you're doing. It's always inspiring. This is Jose Zambrana from EPA Research and Development based in Los Angeles. And my question, Kif, is I saw a lot of themes on resilience. It's something that I'm working on lately. I'm wondering, do you compile the projects that the fellows do in any fashion? Because we're looking at databases of projects that may have resilience themes. Thanks.
You're making me remind me to put my video back on. Yes and no. As I think Victoria was from RARE could attest, the budgets for AmeriCorps are lean. And so resources to do reflection is hard. And so we do, and I can talk to you a little bit about it offline too, is we've been, for the last bunch of years, we have fellows put together case studies, some of which OPR has shared through their portal. We're trying to make that more standardized. We do it through like a survey tool, so it's coming in a format we can analyze. And I actually had a consultant we work with on evaluation do a pass to say what's there, because it's always been a burden of mine. We're generating all this good work, but I don't have a synthesis of the really hot spots, good stuff, best cases, because I just don't have the resources to do it. So I'd love to collaborate with you and share. And I can see Victoria nodding about the limits of evaluation.
Yeah, let's talk offline, because we're able to get sort of free virtual interns through the federal government, and we paired one with Marshall this past year. Maybe there's something we could do to augment that. So let's talk.
That would be fabulous. Yeah, and I mean, it's very much in our interest to take a great outcome in a particular fellow outcome and go beyond the fellows, go to just the other local governments who might benefit from a policy approach or what have you. And in particular, I'll mention, we're thinking a lot about this with COVID recovery. If I can get 10 or 15 of my fellows working on COVID recovery activities, they're going to generate a body of knowledge at the leading edge that I can then disseminate, right, to others and see, because they'll be doing stuff that hopefully they have the time to pull out and extract. And it's obviously really urgent right now, because it's going to take up the bulk of our next several years, I think, to dig out from under this.
Thanks, Kif.
Thanks, Jose. Anybody else have a question we got a hand up from Victoria. Go ahead, Victoria.
It's not so much a question, just so much as a hello, Kif. And I feel like there's lots of overlap between the program, the Civic Spark program, and the RARE program up in Oregon. We focus specifically on supporting rural communities, but a lot of it is like broadband support and bringing communities up to better environmental standards and so on and so forth. And I feel like there's a lot of space for us to compare notes. And I was particularly interested in the Civic Spark program this year because so many of our applicants listed that they were applying to both RARE and Civic Spark. So it would be interesting just to chat with you at some point in the future about about, yeah, the similarities of our programs and supporting each other and all those sorts of things.
And I'm wondering, because my understanding was RARE was only for graduate students.
No, so we have graduate level AmeriCorps members, but it's in terms of the type of work that we have people taking on. Like, we have members who will do the entire parks plan for a city of 6,000 to 8,000, but they graduated with a bachelor's degree. So it's graduate level work, and we support them with the resources at the University of Oregon through the School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management, but it's not required that they have a master's, just a bachelor's.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd love to catch up.
Yeah, because we're on the same thing. We're trying to get leaders to the next level and support them in terms of, all of the same good things.
Well, this may be relevant to the rest of you as well, but I'll say, and it's particularly probably it's on Victoria's mind, the last few years of recruitment for AmeriCorps have been tough. As the economy has done incredibly well, it's brought down the number of people taking on service positions, which are not well compensated. The flip happens in a time like this. And so we may all see spikes of interest in going to grad school, in being in service programs. Not that that's a good outcome, but you're going to see a lot of people wanting to dig into this work because they see it as a bit of a safe haven, whether to go to grad school now or to take on an AmeriCorps type position.
Agreed. Okay, Grant has a question.
Okay, greetings. As a university, and it looks like, our role, or in this would be, we would be a feeder to the program, where we talked about the next step. I've had an AmeriCorps back in 2000. I had an AmeriCorps member in Pennsylvania. He's still at Soldiers and Sailors. He's the education director. So he's been there 20 years. So I'm familiar with this. When I was at West Overton Museums, I had another AmeriCorps person. And as Gavin pointed out earlier, it's only as good as the state that supports it. I moved to Georgia, and AmeriCorps was like pretty much non-existent. Well, it was there, but it was such a hassle, it wasn't worthwhile. So as far as the university, I guess we would be able to suggest, AmeriCorps members, because I think Texas has something going on. I have to explore that. Suggest, hey, you're working on this project. This is a student, a fellow that can help out. And, I'm just not seeing it as a university. These would be graduates that would be going to the next step, not necessarily students we would be connecting right now. It would be after.
Well,
Sure.
I could give you a couple ideas in that space. So AmeriCorps positions do not have to be full-time. There are programs that run with quarter-time members, half-time members. So sometimes there are programs that are actually based on campus, and they're working with students, and their time as AmeriCorps members is more like a work-study allocation. And so you could run a program, and I actually wrote a template model for the California State Universities to run their own program with like half-time members being students and doing this as something that was like linked with credit, so that their EPIC activities would be something they were getting stipended for and getting AmeriCorps sort of recognition and education award for. There's some complications involved in it, but there is some possibility there. The other idea that Marshall and I have kicked around a little bit is like, gosh, it'd be amazing if actually we had an AmeriCorps program that was really specifically designed to give EPIC programs AmeriCorps members to support their EPIC operations. That could be a role of an AmeriCorps. So you might get one or two, and if every campus had one or two, that would be a national AmeriCorps program designed to empower this connection. And God, that would be super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've been following this too, Kif, but there's been tons of support on the federal level for expanding AmeriCorps programs, and they're talking about it, boosting AmeriCorps numbers, to 750,000 nationally for the next 3 years. So
yeah, specifically
exciting times for AmeriCorps programs.
Yeah. If it goes through, my big question will be, and this is a bit of inside baseball, but just for you guys to know, AmeriCorps loves to increase available positions, but they haven't really increased the federal side of the support. So people like Victoria and I have to raise the balance of the funding which in our case, it's like 65% of our total budget is not the AmeriCorps budget. And so if they create more spaces, but they don't give us more money, that just makes a fundraising challenge for me in competition, and I can't pay people more. So there's a bit of an equity issue with AmeriCorps programs too, as far as the who can get in and how, because of the limited pie that's out there. But that's another conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for that tidbit. And also, Grant, thank you for your question. I forgot to mention somewhat in the beginning that all of the friends of the Epic Network interviews will be focused on optional resources that exist outside of the normal per diem of Epic programs as options for you to use to augment what you're trying to do as you're building out your program, or increasing the range of your program and the supports that your program offers to local government. And so if it doesn't make sense in the short term, it's okay. That's kind of why the Friends of the Network series exists. It's a space for you to kind of maybe find inklings of ideas that might be able to move your program a step forward in one direction, or you might get the idea of like, it doesn't make sense to do it in this state, and maybe I can ask Kif a question about, maybe he knows somebody in the state. He might not have a program that I can work with in the foreseeable future, but he might be a thought leader I could connect with, and he's a friend of the network, so I can send him an email. And that's kind of, again, part of this idea, and I should have done a little bit more of an intro on that maybe at the beginning, but I really appreciate your question. And also, Kif, I really appreciate the time you've taken to do this presentation for us, interview style presentation, not quite sure, discussion. I really, a round of applause for him, everybody. I know it means a lot, and I'm very thankful that we had this conversation ahead of time. Thanks, Jose, for your audible applause. And I'm glad that we had a discussion with Laura Martin of University of Mississippi ahead of time to kind of put that slide together. And again, all of you will have the slides as a part of the resources that we share. All of our webinars will put together some kind of slide like this with links to resources. We will link that up, and Kif and I have a little bit of homework left. He's done most of this already, but to draft some information to make it really easy for you to kind of click and press send with your interest to incorporate different aspects of what was presented today to try and build those connections between these programs. And I do encourage you to continue the discussion we started today. You can use the feedback loop form that I provided in the chat box. You can go online to our social media channels and use the hashtag 2020EpicN, as this is a part of the 2020 EpicN series, webinar series. There we go. And CivicSpark's also on social media, so do please tag them. And you can view more of our events coming up on epicn.org/events, and also on our YouTube channel now. There's a Friends of the Network playlist, so you can kind of see the 3 different videos we've produced so far of organizations, including Civic Spark, as well as a couple others. This has been the 2020 EpicN webinar series, Friends of the Network interview with Civic Spark and Kif Scheuer.